You may have probably seen these maps of the olden days. They are normally called bird's eye views and are often considered to be whimsical portrayals of what old communities may have been. However, if you consider why these were made and how they were produced, you will discover that they are not whimsical at all. In fact, they are highly accurate maps that depict actual buildings, houses, and businesses of their era and location. The art of making the bird's eye view maps came over to the United States prior to the Civil War. Immigrants from Europe such as Thaddeus Mortimer Fowler, Henry Wellage, Oakley H. Bailey, C.J. Pauley, Albert Ruger, and others did these lithographs. Some perfected what was then called panoramic maps, but later more commonly called bird's eye views. During the war, they would illustrate Union camps. In the years following the Civil War, the art was commercialized by these artists and others who contracted with large publishing houses to reproduce their maps. The price of these is very hard to track down. One good example is found when Pauley was selling bird's eye views of Oshkosh, Wisconsin in the year 1877. They went for $2 for an 18 by 24 lithograph. That's about $54 per sheet in 2022. Their method of production involved a lot of old-fashioned legwork. They would travel to a town. For example, we'll take a look at Racine, Wisconsin. Although this particular lithograph is in pretty bad shape, it's a good example. Then they would contact city officials and explain that their lithograph would portray the community as a prosperous, growing place that was really beautiful. Examples of their previous work would help to seal the deal, and they would obtain street diagrams of the town plus any other materials that would give the artist the true layout of the main streets. From that, they would draw grid lines at angles converging in the distance at vanishing points. All the secondary streets, rivers, and railroad tracks would then follow the same diverging perspective. Next, they would actually walk each and every street, stopping to sketch every house, business, barn, stable, railroad stop, church, hospital, school, and government building. It sounds like an incredible amount of work. However, they only had to sketch two sides of each structure. Many single-story small homes were depicted simply, and a common image was used. Yet others were depicted in great detail. The level of detail was based entirely on the perceived potential of anyone involved in that residence to buy one of the finished bird's eye view lithographs. If it was obviously a low-income residence, the simplest of images would be used. If you were a big business, a higher resolution image was used, because you were far more likely to buy one of the lithographs. Churches were always well depicted, but not for religious reasons. No matter what your income level, in those days, you were likely to attend church. Thus, although your home was seen in a basic form, you were more likely to shell out some money because there in the drawing was your church. Waterfronts were always depicted as bustling with vessels, because that showed that the harbor town was thriving economically. Plus, any underlying maritime industry was keenly represented. As an example, in this 1893 bird's eye view of Superior, Wisconsin, which was the home of the whaleback freighter, there are 11 whalebacks depicted, 5 of which are under construction. Vessels were often depicted accurately. Here we see in the Port Huron lithograph a whaleback properly depicted towing 2 whaleback barges. This is a Pauley image. On the other hand, in the same image, here we see a steamer with 3 smokestacks amidship. other than large sidewheel passenger boats. There was no such thing on the lakes. More interesting, however, is this depiction of the ship reporter rowing out to identify the passing lake boats. Apparently, the ship reporter's office was inland and not easily depicted elsewhere in the lithograph. But they paid their money. Once the basic legwork and sketching were done, the artist would go around to the businesses and ask for subscriptions. Anyone who bought a lithograph in advance would have their business numbered in the drawing and then indexed in the margin. For a bit more cash, you could have your business's name scrolled into or near the image in the lithograph. For an additional fee, your building would be depicted in an inset on the lithograph. Such inset images were highly detailed. Now, for even more money, you could have a banner sash going down the building with information added. Now, I've seen at least one source professing that the bird's eye views were made by artists while hanging from a tethered balloon. Although on its face this may seem plausible, it's actually nonsense. Although some Civil War reconnaissance was done by balloon, by the post-war era, ballooning was largely seen as a stunt done for public entertainment and whatever cash the balloonist could bring in. Additionally, these initial sketches took days and perhaps even weeks to complete, and any modern-day balloonist will tell you that you need exactly the right weather for a single ascent. To put an artist up in a balloon for days at a time simply wasn't going to happen. Now, although some aspects of the lithographs were indeed embellished, such as future development projects that the town had planned, as well as the depiction of streets and landscapes that were amazingly clean, we can now see why these drawings of buildings and locations are so accurate. There was money to be made. The lithographs were not produced in big atlases, but rather were sold as individual sheets. All of the bird's eye view images seen here are from the Library of Congress, except for one, which is from my own library. My wife will tell you that I always have a story to go with a story, and I have a story to go with this story. Back in the early 2000s, I was doing a book signing tour and some research in mid-Michigan, Saginaw Bay City area, and also visiting my parents. And one day they decided that they'd go along with me on a little side trip to Bay City. While we were there, we came across an area where they were building some new condos on the riverbank. So Mom and Dad decided to stop and look at these places. That's my parents, always trying to look at property that they can never afford. So I went along with them, and while we were there, the fellow who was the developer for this site rolled up. And in engaging my parents in some conversation, of course, my mom bragged that her son was a Great Lakes author and knew all about this kind of stuff. And the guy looked at me and he said, "You will never believe what we found when we dug the foundations for these condos." And I looked at him and I said, "I'll bet you discovered big lumps of coal about that big around." And his eyes got big and he said, "How did you know that?" And I said, "It's my job to know that. Besides, I study this area, and plus, I have a Ruger of the Saginaw River, Bay City, and that shows me exactly where the Dennison's coal yard is located." Zooming in on Bay City, Michigan, this is where the condos are, right near where Midland Street used to be. And if we go back in time, we zoom in and we find that there's the Midland Road Bridge, swing bridge where it used to be. And there's number 59, which is listed as the T.R. Dennison Coal Yard and Dock. You can find some really terrific bird's eye view drawings of just about anywhere in the United States, prominently in the northern countries, since the southern countries really didn't have the assets to pay for such things after the war. But they're all at the Library of Congress, and if you get in there and start snooping around on them, believe me, have a lot of time left in your day, because it is fun and addictive to do. This is your only warning.